Time to open the C-suite. I'm Corey.
I'm Mike.
So today we're going to talk about mergers and acquisitions, which is usually just acquisitions. And it's one of those big topics that CEOs all think they're going to be spending all their time doing. Critically important when they do it, but really complicated.
Well, and it's the startup dream for many people. Is it's what you're thinking about. How do you get to some point? They call it the exit. It's not really the exit. But there's a line out there in kind of startup world of you as the entrepreneur may go through this a handful of times in your career if you have a highly successful career as an entrepreneur versus the buyer, especially if it's a corp dev team, they're doing this all the time. So you're at this dramatic disadvantage. So I'm going to come from that standpoint. I have a little exposure here. As CEO of my first company, I was at the table twice where we almost sold, and you were on my board. And then we ended up promoting a CEO, and I stepped aside and I had a front row view with maybe some comments here and there to the third attempt, which we did end up selling. So I think I'm dangerous enough that I can ask you some of the questions that most of the rest of us are highly curious about.
Okay.
But you've, for context, done how many deals like this at what type of companies?
I have done dozens of acquisitions and divestitures.
Okay.
And done them billions of dollars of deals over through public companies, private companies, and I've also sold companies as the executive. So kind of all over the map here.
Okay. All right, so let's crack into that for the rest of us. So, all right, and then you've also been on the board or investor of startups.
Been a board of companies that have exited and boards of companies that have done acquisitions.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to speak from the startup founder. You start a company, and at the naive first-time entrepreneur standpoint, you just think at some point we get to enough traction that somebody's going to buy us because we have the traction. What's the real reason from a strategic standpoint that the larger company, and we'll just stick to that for a moment, not the private equity yet, but the larger company is actually looking to make an acquisition regardless of the traction?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, they don't care about you.
Yeah,
right. I mean, so every time I've been in a big company, right. I mean, every time I've been in a big company and we've talked about acquisitions, it's because of us.
Yeah, right.
Not because of you, it's because of us.
Yeah.
What's our strategy? Mm-hmm. What are we trying to do? It's not that we don't see other companies in the market and we don't see what they might provide us, but it's what they might provide us. It's what fits our strategy. Acquisitions, and I'll say everyone always puts the term mergers and acquisitions together. It's 99% acquisition. So let's just get that out of the way. So acquisitions is very much driven on filling gaps or driving the strategy of the buying organization. And that could be the actual product or go-to-market strategy. It could be a financial strategy. But it is a strategic goal that company has identified that acquiring another company or a product or product line or acquiring something to plug in will fit. And that is what I feel those that are trying to sell their companies forget. They're like, I'm ready to sell now. None of it doesn't fit anybody else's strategy right now.
Yeah, right. And from that startup standpoint, the line often talked about is the bigger company is going to have to make at some point a buy or build decision. And in many cases, that means that if they build, they might just kill your startup, or if they buy, that'll make your dream come true. So why isn't it always a build decision? You've got all the resources, you can wipe us out.
And that's where your traction and market really comes into play, right? So, as I've sat around a table before and we've had those buy versus build decisions, one example, as CEO, we started to try and build. And we said, this is going to be harder than we think. We're lacking some of the expertise. We're going to have to go hire a few more people. And if we could find an acquisition that would fit these criteria,
already got the team,
then and we found someone that wasn't a perfect fit, but they were an 80% fit and we were at 20% on our own. So I was like, let's just roll. Let's just go into it. So you typically try and build first, but that build may never make it past paper. The build is the discussion. And then you say, how long is it going to take? Does somebody have traction we're going to have to overcome? Do we have some unique capabilities that building would take advantage of? Would it be too hard to integrate with someone else and get those to work together? Does somebody else in the market really solve what we want? So the decision to make an acquisition is all about how it fits my strategy, but part of that strategy might be, do I need to show the market that I've got this much revenue in this area faster?
Yeah. Okay.
Right now, I am seeing companies trying to do acquisitions of artificial intelligence technology because their investors, their shareholders, public or private, want to know that they're in the AI space.
Okay.
So they're like, we can't get there fast enough. We can't hire fast enough. Let's go buy something.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's, I now can say I have the technology and I've got revenue that's AI driven.
Yeah. Okay.
That might be the strategic need for the moment.
Yeah. Okay.
But it all comes back to a strategic need.
All right. So let me ask you this from the company that would be bought, whether it's startup or these could be, private equity backed larger companies that still at some point are looking at, we're probably going to sell, whether it's to another financial group or another company. How do you, as the CEO or leadership team of that company, routinely, get yourself informed by what your potential buyers' strategies are? Is it worth your time at all? Do you just put it off until the end? Like, how do you recommend?
Yeah, if you are a CEO or senior executive, or the term Mike mentioned earlier, corp dev, corporate development, which is typically a department in a larger company that is responsible to find acquisitions. Yeah. If you are, looking at from a smaller company, get to know the corporate development, get to know the executives at those larger companies as soon as possible. Okay. Create all of those relationships.
Even if you're concerned that they might build?
Yes, and you may limit what you share with them, but you need to be on their radar. Okay. Why? Because when they have the discussion on build, you want them to know enough to think of you.
Yeah. In a respectful way, that's like, hey, they're not something to shrug off. They're actually a strong team.
That's right. Okay. And there is all this thought of, I need to run under the radar. I need to not let people know who I am. Or if we just keep our heads down and execute, the keeping the heads down and executing is great unless your goal is to get acquired. Yeah. In which case, someone's got to know who you are.
Yeah, right.
And rarely do large companies buy other companies out of the blue.
Yeah. Okay.
There's usually there's some impetus to that, right? Yeah. There is some, I need to do it right now because of the strategic need. Yep. There's a financial need. That other company might be at a point where it's time now. They hit a financial milestone we wanted. They developed some new technology, but I only knew that because I knew them.
Yeah. Right.
Right. So, very rarely, I have bankers say this all the time and boards I'm on and such, we're going to run a competitive process. Yeah. We're going to get a bid. Then we're going to go shop to 10 other companies. Yeah. And I'll ask most of the bankers, like, how often does that actually lead to truly competitive bids? Yeah.
When we finally did get to the table to explore a sale, which happened a few years in a row, right? The relevant potential buyers, for the most part, were the parties that we almost by accident had gotten to know over the last few years. And it wasn't like a strategic thing from me or my team members. Eventually it was, but not all, but most of the parties just happen to be previous relationships. And there's a great part in this book, Exit Right, which is our friends here in Chicago, Mark Ackler and Mert Isiri, where they talk about boards of startups should have an exit talk at least once a year. Not every board meeting, but an exit talk once a year, which is a counterintuitive thing because as the founder, at least like when I was starting up 2012, 2013, you kind of have this mentality that if I go to you as the board member and say, hey, let's talk about, where we might exit to. Yeah. Is Corey going to think that I'm losing focus, that I'm getting fatigued, that I'm tired? Right. And so I thought in that book, that's a great mentality shift of you want to talk about it early and often so that those relationships have years to develop.
That's right.
It's not me as the founder being fatigued or like wanting to get out, but this is a long-term relationship that has to be developed for the most part.
100%. And on the other side of the table, not the companies just selling having that, but if you're a buying company, if you're a company that does acquisitions, you probably should be keeping a list of likely companies. Yeah. You should probably be socializing that with your board at least twice a year, 2 board meetings a year, like, hey, these are possible targets, and always keep a bit of a thesis on what's going on. I was always big on if I knew companies in the space that I might want to acquire one day, I needed to have relationships with them. Yeah. And that's the other side, right? So now I'm reaching out to them because I wanted to know them. I wanted to see where they would fit in our strategy. Yeah. And maybe we never would get there, but I needed to know when it made sense to pull the trigger.
All right. So let me ask you this then. When we first hit the Inc. 500 list of, whatever, a certain growth rate, and we were above 10 million revenue, all of a sudden I get all these emails from private equity associates. Mostly PE, maybe some companies as well. Are those emails a founder should respond to? Do you take the meeting? Because
Yeah.
And at one point it was a lot. And so I thought they were just kind of spam emails. Some of them ended up being relevant relationships, but why is that happening? And do you respond to them or not?
So there's two schools of thought on it. One school of thought is take all of them, take the calls, get your name out there among the PE class. Now this is different than strategics. If it's coming from a strategic, every time.
Yeah, and by strategic you mean a company.
Company. If it's coming from a company and it's typically going to come from the corp dev team, I would take that every time, because that means you've got a large company associated with your sector that wants to know who you are. Every one of them.
Which means you're going against the fear of them
Yes.
just taking your intel and building it.
Yes.
Which is a viable fear, but you're saying the benefit outweighs
the knowing who each other are matters. And just control. You don't have to go and
Don't
here's my revenue numbers.
Yeah.
Here's how many people. Just have a real conversation about the market, what you're seeing. If it's an investor, a private equity firm, a venture capital firm, remember, they have the equivalent of a sales development rep, an SDR on staff. Their job is to get to know as many companies as they can.
Yeah.
Their job is to then, listen to you, learn about you, put you in their database, and kind of keep up and determine if you're a fit for their investment profile.
Okay.
So I did not return many of those calls.
Okay.
I was not a believer that cold calls mattered like that.
Okay.
I know a lot of people that do take all of those calls just so that they can get on everybody's radar and get in everyone's database. Okay. But here's what I found in those scenarios. I take all the calls. I talk to every venture firm. 3 years later, I'm ready to raise money. I go back to that firm. Well, that entry-level person I talked to isn't there anymore.
Yeah.
And then I talk to somebody there and they go, oh, yeah, you're in the database. Oh, it's been a couple of years since we updated it, right?
Yeah.
So, if you're talking about transacting from an investment standpoint, meaning getting, a fundraise or an exit to a private equity, those are also relationships you're going to keep. Those are the people that do deals from a cold start.
Yeah. Okay.
Strategics don't do deals from cold start. In financial firms, not only do they do deals from a cold start, they move faster than strategics because that is their day job. Doing deals. Right.
Yeah. So actually, which means maybe you don't need to start the financial relationships as early as the company's strategic side.
That's right.
Now let me ask you this. So you've obviously been the acquiring company. Far more than most, say, founders will then sell. So you've got sort of the advantage as the buyer.
Yeah.
Help us understand what goes potentially wrong in an acquisition, because I think that's always an important thing to understand of what would make this a good fit.
Yeah, I mean, and let's talk to it from the standpoint of the transaction, because integration is a whole nother topic for us to talk about. From the standpoint of actually getting a transaction done, it's unexpected surprises.
Okay.
It's numbers aren't what we thought they were. Growth rates aren't what they thought we were. Oh, the product's got a big hole in it. I had an acquisition almost fall apart one time because it was a company based internationally, and we realized that they were paying employees out of a different entity. It was like, whoa, okay, right? So those type of things go wrong, and that's why you do due diligence, right? That's why you work through it. If you're the selling company, you should do that interrogation in advance and know what those things are they're going to find and be prepared to deal with them.
Yeah.
If you're the acquiring company, I have seen so many companies get excited about doing a deal. They put the term is called deal heat, to get deal heat. We got to do a deal. We got to do the deal. That you forget these things and you forget to do some of the important detailed work through the transaction. And this is where a board needs to be really a big player and ask a lot of questions. And it shouldn't be like one board meeting at the end of the deal. Yeah. You should be, as a board member during a transaction, I want to see 3 or 4 cuts at that, where I want to see the thesis behind it. Then I want to see the first round of diligence. Then I want to see where we stand today. Then I want to see a final presentation before we approve the deal. Right. And that's as the executive leading the purchase, I'm thinking about constantly reporting back and getting buy-in along the way.
All right. How many stakeholders? I know it's going to be different per company, but if I'm the company selling, maybe I'm interacting with you and it feels like this is all Corey, but like any sale, you've got stakeholders. How many people are behind the scenes here?
I mean, there's going to be at least 5 to 10 people on the buying company side, and they're going to have double that in terms of advisors behind them.
Across multiple departments?
Yeah, so you're always going to have the CEO and the CFO, period, full stop. They're going to be there. A lot of times you're going to have someone on whatever that product side is, whether it's a technology product or something, somebody on that side of the house. You'll typically have at least one person in legal, if not multiple people in legal in the organization. So we just hit 5 people without even getting into real specialties yet, right? If things go well, the people team, the HR team, they'll get brought into the picture at some point. So, most of the executive team will get touched.
Now there's stages of how these deals get done, right? You start with whatever indicator of interest, IOI, term sheet, goes to legal. And so the probability from the buyer standpoint, because from a startup, you're like, I've got an IOI, like the deal's done. From the buyer standpoint, when you put down the IOI, then the term sheet, then the contract, like, what are you actually thinking is your probability?
So there are very different ways of approaching the indication of interest, IOI or LOI, letter of interest. Some organizations use indication of interest just to open the door and say, hey, we're interested in buying you. And then they want to do some work to get to a non-binding letter of intent. And a letter of intent is non-binding in the sense that it's not a legally bound document, but it outlines more of the terms of a transaction, and that would lead to a purchase agreement. So I see some organizations that throw around indications of interest like candy. Like, oh, here, try that, and that gets
out looking around.
Yeah, and then they get into the company. More times than not, if a letter of intent comes out, that's a little more thought through. You've had some more conversations. They've thought about what this would look like. Though you see some companies that are willing to put a non-binding letter, a letter of intent out there, and then start diligence. So you really should think about how much interaction have you had with this company, how much do they know about you, as to how seriously you take what comes over. Right? Nothing is binding until a purchase agreement is signed. And deals fall apart at a really high rate. I don't have it scientifically, but I'm gonna tell you, half of them fall apart. From the IOI or LOI stage, half of them get to the finish line. The other big thing about doing a deal, and this is for buy and the sell side, I have never done a deal that didn't, we call it, die a death before it finished.
I've heard that.
Everybody walked away from it. We saw it with, we've seen it, where everybody walked away from the table at some point. So this deal will never happen. And back, okay, we could find a way. So it's going to be that fraught a process, period. No way around it.
All right. Well, I think that gives us a little touch on mergers and acquisitions, which, as you said, are 99% acquisitions.
That's right.
Maybe we do more later, but that's it for today. Opening the C-suite.
Thanks.